Welcome, everyone, to our presentation today by Sharon Milgram, Director of the NIH Office of Intramural Training and Education. In a minute, we will learn from her about painful and important lessons about resilience and wellness for scientists, followed by a panel discussion featuring members of the ASBMB Women in Biochemistry and Molecular Biology Committee. But first, I wanted to introduce you to our very new committee, Women in Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, otherwise known as WBMB. This is our committee. We started in 2019 at this very meeting. We're a mixture of professors that work in R1 universities, as well as in universities that serve primarily undergraduates. We try to draw from committee members from across the US. This year, we congratulate our first award winners for the ASBMB Leadership Awards that the committee gives. The Early Career Award recipient is Natalia Jura from UCSF. She's a crystallographer. And our Mid-Career Award is Anita Corbett from Emory, and she works on RNA biology. But to encourage all of you that we need more nominations for the 2022 ASBMB Leadership Awards. They recognize individuals with a strong commitment to advancing the careers of women in biochemistry and molecular biology, along with demonstrated excellence in research, discovery, and service. We have two, early career, mid-career. Applications are due very soon. And we would love to have your entries. I just want to let you know about other upcoming experimental biology events of interest. Tomorrow at 5:30, we have a program on diversity, equity, and inclusion, where we are and where we should go from here. On Thursday, we have a program of best practices for managing and preventing incidences of harassment in the workplace. And then on Thursday, later in the day, we have a workshop on networking on inclusive practices and inclusive course content. So please tune into these upcoming events in experimental biology sponsored by the ASBMB. And next week, to talk more about resilience, we're going to be having a resiliency and wellness networking event, May 6th, 4 to 5 p.m. We hope to talk to each other more about the challenges and strategies that we used in developing resilience. It's free, but registration is required, so please register and come join us. We'd love to have you. All right, so it's now my turn to introduce Sharon Milgram. So Sharon received her PhD in cell biology from Emory University. She completed postdoctoral training at Johns Hopkins. She joined the faculty at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she rose through the ranks to full professor, running a laboratory focused on cell biology. At the same time, she developed her skills in mentoring students at a series of different levels, including the medical scientist training program. In 2007, she joined the NIH Office of the Director, where she is the director of the Office of Intramural Training and Education. The office she directs counsels over 5,000 trainees, and she helps them manage science careers, mentorship, leadership, and management in research environments. I first met Sharon at a Train the Trainers meeting, I think 6 years ago now, where I heard her speak about resilience, and there was something about what she was saying that really resonated with me. I've used her slides to give my own lectures to our own students at Yale on resilience. And I'm so pleased that she is here to talk to us today about painful and important lessons about resilience and wellness for scientists. Sharon Milgram, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. And I'm going to struggle for a moment to get the screen share, but there I go. So, it's interesting you mentioned that Train the Trainer 6 years ago. I think that was a watershed moment for me. I realized that I really wanted to dedicate a lot of time to the idea of providing our trainees with a more supportive and nurturing environment. And I have the opportunity at NIH to participate in our anti-harassment steering committee and many other committees looking at building a more diverse and inclusive workforce. And somehow all these things have come together in my mind. And so I'm going to try to link a variety of things that I think about, and I know all of you think about, around taking care of each other and nurturing the next generation of scientists. I'm going to try to pull it all together in talking about wellness and resilience. And it's really, every time I put this slide up, and I've been giving talks for a while now, I sort of sigh. I think that not only are we all forever changed by the experience of the pandemic and the experience of the racial injustice and the reckoning in our country for those of us who walk through this world with white privilege. We are just so changed by this experience. It's a collective trauma. It's an individual trauma. Our families are changed. Our labs are changed. Our lives are changed. And I think the only way that we will all make meaning of this in the long term is to pull out the positive things that we have learned from this. And for me, at the family level, there have been some. And I often reflect on those, but more than anything lately, I find myself reflecting on the positive change that could happen for the biomedical research community if we sit with the experiences that we've all gone through. And I don't just mean the experience of the pandemic, but I mean all of the harassment and bullying, all of the data coming out about our community that says that we have a long way to go to be welcoming and inclusive. And I think these are really painful moments of self-reflection and community reflection. And I want to start with a little bit of that today. These are some headlines, and they predate the pandemic. So the top one of strikingly high rates of depression and anxiety in PhD students in the biomedical sciences was from March 2018, and they showed a 6-fold higher rate of anxiety and depression in our PhD students compared to the broader community. The literature has been developed even further with this paper in 2019. And this paper, this article, actually, this is a headline from The Guardian, which is a newspaper I like to read because Yotamaro Lengi, my most favorite chef, has a column there. This was the headline: researchers facing shocking levels of stress. Nearly 2/3 of those who took part in the survey had witnessed bullying or harassment. And in that survey, also 50+% said that they themselves had either sought support for mental health issues or had wished that they were able to seek support. So this is our community. I mean, this is what we have been a part of for a long time, right? A community where nearly 2/3 of a large survey have witnessed bullying and harassment, where students enter graduate school wanting to do their best and leave feeling the love of science beat out of them. When you think about the way that we have welcomed people of color, you can't say that in that regard we have a lot to be proud of either. And this article is just one of many that came out after the murder of George Floyd, looking at issues of systemic racism and disparities in the biomedical sciences. In every way, the pandemic has been a lesson in what is both the best of science, our ability to deal with this catastrophic health event and to generate treatments and vaccines and public health measures and to work really in an engaged way across the globe to tackle this challenge. That's really the best of science. But right here in these 4 headlines is really the worst of science. And I really feel that now is a chance for us to pause and come out of this pandemic as different people who really want to tackle this. And I think there have been many of us who've wanted to tackle this and many people who talk about it, but maybe something will be different and we will find some way forward. And of course, to change the culture of science, means really taking an integrated approach. And that's at the individual and group level. We have a lot of sitting with our blind spots and our biases and our behaviors. We have a lot of community listening sessions, a lot of discussing how we want to treat each other, whether that be at the really micro level within an office or a research group, or the macro level within a department, university, scientific society. We have a lot of work at the individual and group level. We have to learn a lot. We also have to unlearn a lot. We have a lot of bad habits, one of which is ignoring the fact of how hard it is to develop mentoring and management skills, and thinking that we can do it on the fly. So we have a lot of learning and unlearning. I find myself, it's odd, I give lectures as if I'm an expert, and then I find myself listening to the questions and comments of people in the audience, realizing how very much I have to learn. And I think that for culture change to really happen, we're all going to have to embrace the idea of lifelong learning in management and in diversity and inclusion, in conflict, in wellness, in mental health, you name it. This is going to take a lot of commitment. We're going to have to change business. It's not business as usual, because we're going to have to find time for all of this. We need changes in institutional policies, accountability, transparency. I mean, these are all things that we've talked about. I think many of you are leaders at your institutions and in ASBMB, leaders in the scientific community. You've been having these conversations, right? We all have. And so I think these are the things that we've been focused on. And what I have been thinking about is perhaps we need to stretch our discussion to include an ongoing dialogue about stress management and wellness for scientists. And I wonder if we will be able to change the culture of science without that discussion. That really a first principle in wanting to change the culture of science is to start talking about stress management and wellness for two reasons. And the first is, to do well, we have to be well. I mean, if we really want to tackle big problems, we have to be well ourselves. But the more important one, and the one that I've been thinking about more and more lately, is to treat others well. We need to be well ourselves. That we have to embrace the idea that wellness is a right for each and every one of us in this enterprise, but it is also a responsibility. When I started thinking about all of this, it really started from a meeting with some summer interns where they talked about being so afraid and overwhelmed of being at NIH. And I said, oh, let me talk to you for a moment about imposter fears. And it lasted about 15 minutes and the questions kept coming. And then I thought, oh, I need to learn more. And at the beginning, I'm not even sure I knew what wellness was. So this is an amazing resource, the Global Wellness Institute. And they define wellness in a really simple way: the active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health. So it's not the absence of disease, and it is not something we do occasionally, right after we submit a grant, after our students defend their proposal. They have a little weekend of wellness. This is like an ongoing, regular process. And if we do it well, we have the chance to thrive at school, work, and life. Wellness includes multiple dimensions. I'll show you a model that we use at NIH that has 4 dimensions. We folded some of the others into those 4 that we like to talk about with our trainees. But the Global Wellness Institute will give you a lot of insight into all the different dimensions of wellness. Dan Siegel is a really great writer. He's written some excellent books talking about the nervous system and how we can tackle challenges by really paying attention to the biology of decision-making, the biology of how we respond to stress, and how our nervous system receives information both in calm times and in stressful times. And he defined this phrase that I really like and that I like to talk to students about, and that is the window of tolerance. That is where our nervous system is excited enough to function, but not so excited that it dysfunctions. When we are really revved up and our nervous system is firing beyond our window of tolerance, we reach this reactive zone. And this might be the place where we say something really snarky to a colleague. This may be the place where we really dump on a trainee who brings us bad news, really needing to talk about it, but we find ourselves outside our window of tolerance. On the other hand, if we have faced setback after setback after setback without processing those and without finding support, eventually we reach this point of sort of giving up, or helplessness and hopelessness. And this is our give up or ignore zone, or like a lot of people like to say, our curl up in a ball and binge watch TV zone, where we essentially say, I just can't anymore. So this window of tolerance, that's where we function most effectively. That's where we respond productively to stress. That's where we easily find our creative problem-solving self. We can address interpersonal issues calmly and respectfully. We can acknowledge mistakes and wrongs and seek to repair relationships and change communities. We have to function within that zone to do the important work that we need to do. One of the reasons why I love the language of a window is it implies that with practice, we can open that window wider. Our window of tolerance could be open further, right? So if we really take care of ourselves, we're going to have a broader window of tolerance. Also, I like it because it brings up this idea that so maybe at one point it slams shut and we don't do very well. We always have a chance to open it back up tomorrow, right? Or in 15 minutes. It's like this idea of an active, moving zone that we want to be in. So that's a little bit of a broad generalization about wellness. But I realized at the start of all of this that beyond the idea of exercise and not getting hangry, which I always get, so I know that concept really well, beyond those two things, I didn't know very much about what it meant to be well. So this is a model of wellness developed by some of the wellness advisors that I now work with in the OITE. And I should say that I am really lucky to have an amazing set of wellness advisors who really appreciate science and scientists and want to help. They help me translate the language of wellness and resilience into the language of scientists. And it really is a fun thing to do. So our model is a 4-quadrant model, and it's really all the things we do and don't do to maintain our body, our heart, our mind, and our spirit. So wellness is necessary for us to maintain that zone of tolerance. It is also the foundation of our resilience, and resilience is required for educational, science, life, and career success. So I'm going to talk a little bit about wellness and then transition, talk a little bit about resilience. And I really am looking forward to the panel because I met some interesting people in the few minutes as we were gathering to make sure Zoom was working. So normally I read these one by one and we pause and people sit with the discomfort of some of the quotes and thinking, how am I doing in this regard? I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. And what generally we ask of people, and what I ask of myself when I do this myself, is a ranking in each of these from never, which is a 1, to always, which is a 5, right? And this is just a chance to more objectively quantify how we're taking care of ourselves. And there are things like you would expect, like getting enough sleep, eating balanced, nutritious meals. A really important one right now in the pandemic is this I avoid numbing out behaviors. Alcohol use has gone up substantially, especially in women. The data on use in alcohol divided by gender was pretty stark to me. Some articles just came out this week and it was picked up by the New York Times. And this one that I want to look at the bottom. I take care of myself when I am sick, need rest, or just need a break. I mean, if you think about the culture of science, we are not a culture that values that. We are a culture that values soldiering through, right? So every talk I give, there's a question in the chat box from the students saying, I really want to take care of myself. Everything you say resonates for me. It makes sense and I need it. I'm burning out, but nobody else around me wants to do this, and they won't respect me if I do. And that's a part of all of this, is first looking at ourselves individually and where are we in all of this, but then saying, where are we culturally? Why is it that the culture of science thinks it's a bad idea to take a sick day, or it's a bad idea to leave early to go to yoga class, or for whatever regular exercise we want to do? So this is physical wellness. Mental health and mental wellness. I want to comment about a few of these. The first is I avoid getting caught up in perfectionism. So many scientists say, but that's a part of my strength. I strive to perfection, and therefore I submit my grants. Some of them get funded, my papers get accepted. I'm always the person invited to give talks. My perfectionism is an important inherent part of my success. But strengths overused become liabilities. That's true in everything. There is no such thing as perfect. And eventually, most of us get really bit in the butt by our perfectionism. It then leads to procrastination and leads to all kinds of problems. There is an amazing literature on something called healthy striving, which means we aim to do a good job. We aim to do a great job when it really matters, and we know the difference. And so I want to focus on that one for a moment, because I think a lot of people wear their perfectionism as a badge of courage. But sometimes as I talk to people who are really struggling, I realize that it's like a 20-pound brick in their backpack all the time. I'm going to talk a lot later about negative or deceptive self-talk. That's a really important element here in thinking about your mental health. Negative stories can really drive us to feel really poorly about ourselves. And another part of this, in terms of how we treat others, when we dump our negative or deceptive stories onto others, we make them feel pretty bad about themselves. And so this one is one that I've been thinking about more and more. And I want to end with this last one. I am open to counseling as a tool to maintain and improve my health and well-being. And we have all kinds of issues around mental health in our country, and I know many other countries are struggling with this as well. For some reason, we think it's okay to take care of our physical health, but there's shame around taking care of our mental health. There aren't enough culturally competent counselors available. There aren't enough inclusive, diverse counselors available in many of our communities. But counseling can be such a powerful tool for maintaining and improving health and well-being of ourselves, our students, and our staff. And beyond asking ourselves, are we open? I think we need to go further and ask ourselves, do we send subtle messages that it's not so okay? A lot of times when I talk to students about getting support, they are so worried about what the senior leadership, the people they care about around them, think about it. So that's mental health. Let's look for a moment at emotional health. I like to tell myself emotions are data, right? And who wants to make decisions without important data? And many of our decisions are driven by our emotions. We like to think that's not true, but study after study shows that it is. And so if we're not aware of our emotions and we don't work with our emotions, then we're missing out on some important data. Students will stuff emotions, staff will stuff emotions, we all will stuff emotions, and then they come out in really unpleasant ways. A little bit again about that idea of how do we treat others. So the first part of this assessment is that I'm actually aware of, in touch with, and let myself feel all of my emotions. I make time to spend with my friends and family, however I define that. So much pressure, I think right now, women are juggling, taking care of their families, and parents who are distant for many of us right now. Our labs and our staff need our support. And we are so busy giving, I think, many, that there isn't a whole lot of time where we just relish the moments that we need. Another one I want to talk about is this last one. I demonstrate compassion for myself and others. Many do a great job and say, oh, always, 4 or 5 for others. But for myself, I need to be hard on myself. Again, that's how I push myself. I'm hard on myself. I tell myself negative stories, and that's how I keep going. But the science of self-compassion, and if you're interested in that, Google Kristen Neff to begin with. She's a faculty member at UT Austin. She did some of the first studies on self-compassion. The science of self-compassion shows us that if we are willing to be human and embrace the fact that we make mistakes, that we're flawed, that there are things we wish were different about ourselves and for ourselves, if we embrace those concepts, we go much farther. We're softer with ourselves when we make mistakes, and therefore we are able to be more resilient moving through. Right now, when I talk to PIs, I've noticed so many of them so focused on compassion for their trainees and for their staff that they're really not spending a whole lot of time acknowledging how hard the pandemic has been for them. And I'm especially worried about our tenure track investigators in this regard, but I think it's true for lots. So I present this a lot of times, and PIs are listening because they want to take care of their trainees. But the first step really is to take care of ourselves first. The last dimension of wellness that we talk about with our trainees is spiritual wellness or spiritual health. For some people, this is organized religion, and they find their spiritual connection in the mosque or in the synagogue or in the church. For others, it can be other things, nature, music. It's whatever it is that makes us feel that we are part of something bigger, however we define that. And I think right now, as we watch in dismay at some things happening both in our country and beyond, I think sometimes it's very hard to feel connected. I think we look and say, are we really a part of this? So I think this is one maybe more important as we watch the pandemic unfold. For trainees, this is an important one because they often feel that there's no space in research environments for people who have spiritual beliefs. One of these that I really love is I allow time to just be. I am a human being versus a human doing. It's one of my favorite ones. And I'll note it's one of our blog posts in our career blog that got the most hits. So people seem very, very interested in this idea that I can actually stop working for a moment and actually just be. A little bit, that one is sometimes tied to one I hear about I avoid extreme use of my phone as a coping tool. I think in some ways our phones are stopping us from sometimes being a human being. I used to walk the dog and just focus on the dog and the noise and the smells, and now I'm half of the time on my phone, and the dog is relishing the walk, but I'm answering emails. So I think that's another really important one. Every time I do this, I see some things I'm pleased about, some things I'm not so pleased about. I imagine the same for you. The real idea here is not to really berate ourselves. That would really not help. The idea is to say, what do I want to learn about? What do I want to think about? What do I want to work on now? What do I want to think about for the future? And the really key thing is this is like a living document. It's not a one-time thing. We really should pull it out periodically and see how we're doing, make tweaks and adjustments, talk about it with someone if we find out that if we feel that we're really on the edge of hitting a sort of burnout zone, if we find ourselves with a slam shut window of tolerance way more often than used to be, we want to really say, why is that? For PIs, I think it's important to remember the wellness of trainees and staff, same for administrators. We want to have these discussions much more often. When something is not talked about in a community, then everybody knows there's a reason to be shame about it, to have some shame about it. So if we don't talk about how we take care of ourselves, students will never learn that it's a part of the process, that it's a part of their toolkit for success. Wellness is really important for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons that is most easy to sort of connect to success in labs is wellness is a foundation for resilience. And boy, if ever there was a career that needed resilience, science would be one of them. Most of our experiments don't work. We submit a great grant and they tell us it's great, and it still doesn't get funded. We face so many ups and downs that resilience is really a key career skill. Resilience is the ability to adapt and grow through adversity and the ability to find a constructive way forward during challenging times. It is not the ability to navigate a difficult challenge with ease. There's nothing that's full of ease about a really difficult challenge, whether it be a personal challenge or a work challenge, an interpersonal challenge in our group. There's nothing about it that should be easy, but we move through it with awareness, intention, and some calmness and skill. The beautiful thing about resilience is it's something that can be learned and developed, so we can realize a greater amount of resilience. It's really just a set of attitudes and behaviors. And if we practice them, and if we learn about resilience, if we do a lot of self-reflection and we develop our self-awareness, then our resilience can really expand. I love to say resilience equals people plus process plus preparation, right? I talk to scientists, so I think that's a nice, easy way to say it. So it's a little bit about community, right? We are not resilient when we are isolated. So I hope a lot of people show up at the resilience networking event. I think it's really important for us to reach out and be supported and support each other. We become resilient by taking support and also by giving support. So it's a two-way street. Resilience is also about sort of the process, how we deal with setback, right? What our strategies are for dealing with setback, and that's what I mean by process. I consider three major things: how we deal with and develop our emotional intelligence, how we understand our distorted self-talk, and how we look at mistakes and learning. And I'm going to talk about that through the work of Carol Dweck about a growth mindset. So resilience is people plus process. The point of preparation is we can't put this off and just grab the resilience when we need it. If we're not working on it regularly all the time, when we need resilience, we won't find it. And so I'm going to go ahead and talk just a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing with trainees and PIs around resilience. And I like to start with this because it's really an optimistic slide. So our thoughts affect our emotions, and our emotions affect our behaviors, and all around. Really, our thoughts affect how we feel and act. Our emotions affect how we think, what we think and do, and our behaviors affect how we think and feel. The reason I say this is a really optimistic slide is because you just need to make a change in any of these areas to see improvements in all of them. And for me, every once in a while when I need a reminder, I just reflect on the difference between a morning that starts with exercise and a morning that starts without. So I don't go to Orange Theory right now. I hope to get back at some point soon, but I'm a big Orange Theory enthusiast. And after exercise, I notice my thinking is just a little bit more positive, and that drives a little bit more positive energy and emotion. And then I find myself functioning better. So you could start with behavior, or you could learn something about your inner thoughts, about the stories you tell yourself. You could work to change those. That can change your emotions and your behaviors. So anywhere along the way, when we make a change, we have a chance to improve in all of the other areas. So 3 places to work and 4 powerful tools. Journaling is an amazing tool for building resilience. I first was introduced to journaling. Our son joined us at about the age of 12 or 13, and it was an amazing period of growth and an amazing period of challenge for me. And I started journaling about it at the suggestion of some other parents. And I was amazed at how much I could let go of all of the things I was worried about once I put it on paper. And so I started journaling with students. There's actually a huge literature on resilience and journaling in healthcare providers, in educational environments. It just lets us be with our thoughts and feelings without worrying what others people think about us. It's a really private place to dump what we have to dump, but we can read it and go back and see patterns. And once we see patterns, right, we have a place to make an intervention. You can journal once or twice a week. You don't have to journal every day. There's all kinds of journaling techniques out there. You just can Google journaling for resilience. You'll get a lot of information. The science behind mindfulness has been powerful and impressive for a long time, even more so the more years there's research. Mindfulness helps us be with our thoughts, feelings, and struggles without judgment. And as we learn to tune into how we're feeling and thinking without really dumping on ourselves with judgment, it really lets us process these negative thoughts and negative emotions much more positively. The other thing I've noticed is mindfulness lets us tap into some positive feelings that sometimes we ignore at work. And sometimes we need that positive feeling to keep going. Community is the third powerful tool, right? We are really struggling with that right now because it's not the same on Zoom. This meeting would be really different. We would all be afterwards standing together and chatting. You'd feel all this energy. You'd see all these smiling people that you haven't seen in a while. We'd be making new friends, and now we're little boxes on a Zoom screen. So it's a challenge right now, but we still have to find ways to be in community. And finally, I mentioned therapy earlier around talking about mental health. It is an incredibly powerful tool for people who find that their resilience is really frayed. Some of us have learned very poor resilience habits growing up. Either it wasn't focused on, or we learned really negative habits. We could have been in a really toxic lab environment where we've learned even worse behaviors. Sometimes we have to undo some maladaptive coping strategies. So these are 4 powerful tools. And I just want to talk a little bit today about the thoughts part. I want to talk a little bit about the way we approach mistakes and a little bit about our negative self-talk. And then we'll get to the great conversation that we're going to have with the panelists. So I love the idea of a growth mindset. And I have to say it resonates for students. When we ask them what's one of the things that they remember the most from our Resilient Scientist series, they say the power of yet. And that's really summarizes a growth mindset in one little phrase. So you can just imagine it this way. Oh, I'm not good at giving talks. That doesn't leave you with anywhere to go. It's not very inspiring. It's not motivating. It's just, I'm not good at it. I just want to give up. That's a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is, oh, I'm not good at talks yet. Now, it can't be we just say yet and I'll get there happy-go-lucky. It's that we have to do something to get there. And that's the whole thing behind a growth mindset. This is a great literature for people who teach. It's a great literature if you interact with young people in your life. I really recommend it. It's all started with the work of Carol Dweck, who is at Stanford, and she wrote a book called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. The honest truth is, as with everything over time, people start to talk about what parts of this make sense, what parts don't, what studies have been extended, replicated, etc. And the honest truth is, I sort of stay out of all of that. I'm not an expert in this. What I can tell you is when students believe that they can grow and learn, then it's a really different experience. The hallmarks of a growth mindset start with just that. We believe we can grow and learn even if something doesn't come easy to us. Whether it's a come easy or a come hard, we believe there's room to grow. That allows us to explore new approaches and take risks, right? We're open to trying new things to tackle a problem when we get stuck. Also, we appreciate everybody needs to grow and learn, so we're more willing to ask for help and use resources when we need to learn. One of the biggest problems I see is people trying to solve really big, messy problems on their own. Somehow they got the message that's what's supposed to be, right? We're supposed to solve problems on our own. These people are busy. We shouldn't bother them, right? We need resources to solve problems. Another thing about a growth mindset is that we appreciate there's both a process and an outcome. The outcome is what happened at the end, and sometimes that sucks. But sometimes the process went pretty well. And we need to at least acknowledge that positive. Students get results that they are really disappointed by. And sometimes we need to remind them, but look, you did the right positive controls, the right negative controls. Your notebook looks great. That's the process. Many, many people ignore the process. And yes, eventually we need some outcome. Let's be honest, right? We can't just go for years and years just celebrating the process, but it's a really important part. Two other things about a growth mindset. One is we work to be more open to feedback. So we develop our feedback resilience. That's another whole element of resilience because, boy, somebody gives you input, your first response is to be defensive. And if it's something we care about, that's a part of our deeply valued part of ourselves, it's even harder to hear. My wife gives me critique about food. And I mean, you might think that the earth has spun on its axis. I'm so sensitive about it, right? Because that's something I really deeply value about myself. That can be the same for our science. That can be the same for our teaching, our mentoring, our management. So when we get feedback about something that really matters to us, it can be very hard to hear. So another part of a growth mindset is we work on that. And finally, we learn from mistakes, ours and others. Students often will say we have to put on our growth mindset hat, and I really like that because the honest truth is we are a mix of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. We're fixed mindset in some things, growth mindset in other things. We can really be struggling with a pandemic and lose a lot of our growth mindset. We can have things going on in our personal life that are distracting, and suddenly we find ourselves in a little bit more of a fixed mindset voice. Over time, resilient learners find ways to recognize their fixed mindset voice and see their fixed mindset actions like, no, I won't go to that workshop, even though I really need it. And they learn to appreciate where it comes from, how to question it, how to soften them, etc. This is really a key part of continued growth and learning. And I think we need a growth mindset to tackle our culture. We really need to say first principles, what aren't we doing right? First principles, what needs to change? What do I need to learn? As someone who's walked through the world with privilege for so long, what do I need to hear from my colleagues who haven't? And that takes being willing to pause and stop. And I think it's a big part of changing our culture. Another big part of our thoughts and how they drive our resilience are the stories we tell ourselves. So we have all these A's, activating events, adversity, things that happen to us. They drive beliefs or stories that we tell ourselves. And actually those stories double down on the consequences. So, sometimes the adversity has a consequence itself, but then our beliefs just add to it, making the consequences even worse. The science that is really important in this regard is the science of cognitive distortions or automatic negative thoughts. And I have to say that in working with students, this is often a point where the chat lights up, where people start realizing how negative the stories they tell themselves are. Cognitive distortions are habitual ways of thinking that are, by definition, distorted and inaccurate. They're often negative in nature, but not always. But when they're negative in nature, they lead us to feel bad about ourselves and the situation. And all of us experience cognitive distortions to some degree. Some of us are more aware of them than others of us. And for some of us, these distortions get in the way of daily activities and functioning. And in fact, there's a lot around cognitive distortions in students and individuals with anxiety and depression, and a belief that cognitive behavioral therapy underlies that belief that if we work to change our thoughts, we can improve our functioning in the face of anxiety and depression. So for some people, cognitive distortions are an irritation. For some people, they're a big irritation. For some people, they can really get in the way of everyday activities and function. And they make sense from an evolutionary perspective. Our brain evolved as a threat sensor. So, as we walked on the savannah years ago, we could eat lunch or be lunch, right? If we were not constantly scanning for threats, we weren't going to survive. So we have this exquisite threat sensor in our amygdala, and it often is driving the ship. Each of us has our go-to cognitive distortions, 5 that I hear about a lot from scientists: all or nothing thinking. We give a talk, it goes well. There's one question that doesn't go well. Someone says, how did it go? And we thought it wasn't very good at all. Didn't go well at all. Catastrophizing. We exaggerate the implications of a setback or a mistake. I got a C, I'm going to get a C next time, and then I'm going to get kicked out of grad school. Mind reading. We make assumptions about what someone else is thinking. We send an email to a colleague or our supervisor. We're heavily vested in getting an answer. We're a little worried about what was in the email and the feedback we might get. They don't answer for 24 hours. Oh, they must hate it. They must be angry at me. I actually have to say, trainees say their superpower is mind reading their PIs, that they do it constantly. Fortune telling. We predict the outcome of an event before it happens. Someone says, please apply for this travel award. No, I'm not going to get it. That's fortune telling. Overgeneralization is when we reach a conclusion about one event and apply it to all similar events. Something happens in one event and we just carry that negativity with us. I see that with students who struggle. They're in a somewhat or very toxic lab environment. They go to the next one. I say, you have to talk to your PI. Oh, it won't go well, right? So they carry one negative event forward. I did that when I failed my qualifying exam and failed to schedule the retake because I was so sure I was going to fail again. And then discounting the positive, or minimizing, also called minimizing. And that's where we discount positive outcomes and attributes by insisting they don't count. We don't see anything positive. We look specifically for the negative. And this is the distortion that underlies imposter fears. And I'm going to talk about those in a few minutes, but I want to make a key point about cognitive distortions. Each of us has our own go-to, the ones that we use a lot. Some of us will see ourselves in many of those. There's 20 or 30 in the literature if you want to look at all of them. There's not an infinite list, which is nice. These are driven by a combination of nature and nurture, what we saw in our environment and cultures growing up. Some of this is tied to our temperament and our genetics and epigenetics. We all have our signatures, like I said, and the problem is when we're stressed, burned out, or otherwise unwell, our distortions are magnified and amplified. Just when we need to tell ourselves a slightly better story, our cognitive distortions are amplified and we tell ourselves a more negative story. When we engage with others, we need to appreciate our own distortions, but we also need to appreciate theirs. So there's like distortion swirling around us, especially when we're like in a tense conversation. Going back to the issue of climate, distorted thinking can also be driven by external factors. So external factors really can amplify our own distorted stories. And this is why having quality mentorship is protective for mental health for graduate students, because I think they don't get these distorted stories dumped on them. So you work in a toxic or bullying work environment, or you're experiencing absent or difficult mentoring relationships, you're on the receiving end of bias, right? Those are external factors that amplify distorted stories. And that's why understanding wellness and resilience is key to us changing the culture of science. The thing is that when these messages are amplified, right, it makes it harder to reach out for support. Or the flip side, if we work in a really supportive culture and environment, if we know we can reach out for people for support, then, right, external factors can help soften our stories and make it much easier. So we really have a role to play in all of that. One cognitive distortion that I like to talk about, and last week I did a webinar jointly for, it was a lot of PIs and staff and a lot of graduate students in this National Resilience Program. Maybe it was a couple of weeks ago already. We did a poll and I wanted the students to see that imposter fears will soften over time. So first I asked them and then I asked all the faculty and administrators. It was interesting. There was some softening over time. Students said, oh, I experience these almost every day. That was about 60% of the students. For the faculty, it wasn't quite that much, but it was still quite a big issue. I think all of us probably, or many of us, need to think about imposter fears. Now, if you notice, I don't say imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, and there's a reason for that. So fear, even though it's unpleasant, is a normal, healthy emotion. The universal trigger for fear is threat of harm, whether it's real or imagined. And fear drives us towards taking beneficial action, right? When we feel fear, we take action to protect ourselves. So to me, if you're new in an academic environment or you're doing something really challenging in a high knowledge environment, it makes sense to be a little bit worried about getting it right or wrong. So to me, using the word fear, imposter fears, normalizes this as something that happens to most of us. Imposter fears are the fear of being seen as not good enough, intelligent enough, capable enough, or creative enough, despite evidence of high achievement. Imposter fears lead us to feel like we don't belong, and we need to feel like we belong to take risks. None of us learns in an environment where we feel like we don't belong. It's why these are such an insidious, distorted feeling. It's why they are so serious and need to be talked about early and often. Again, when we don't talk about something, there's shame about it. But when we talk about it, suddenly it's in the open and we can start tackling it. There are a lot of causes of imposter fears, and the data suggest about 70% of people report experiencing imposter fears at some point in their educational and work journey. And because being in an environment that feels foreign to you triggers imposter fears, we get waves of imposter fears as we move up and along in our career journey. In small doses, imposter fears, these other distorted stories, could help motivate us to work harder, right? They could be sort of positive. A small amount of catastrophizing makes us check that our slide deck is ready, makes us reread the grant a second time. But when unchecked and unquestioned or inappropriately dumped on us by others, these distorted stories really get in the way. We avoid asking questions, we avoid reaching out for help, we avoid volunteering for assignments, we withdraw from community. Many people use unhealthy behaviors to try to feel better. And this is just an insidious negative cycle tied in ways to the rates of depression and anxiety in our community. And so I just want to end this part by asking you if when you talk to yourself, do you talk like a jackal or a giraffe? This comes from the work of nonviolent communication, which is a method of solving conflict developed many years ago by Dr. Rosenberg and colleagues, and you can visit the website. So do you tear yourself down in your stories or do you build yourself up? And then I realized that actually sometimes we tell ourselves unrealistic positive stories or we ignore issues. So are you more of a jackal or a giraffe or an ostrich? But then think about how you talk to other people and how you mentor. Are you a mentor that uses giraffe language? Do we sometimes avoid issues with our trainees? We're sort of an ostrich. And do we sometimes jackal, right, and tear people down? I think it's a really pretty important image that I try to hold in my head. I have giraffes all over my office. That's seems to be the theme a lot of times. Students really love this language and it becomes a verb. I was jackaled on or I jackaled at someone. So we all need to explore our stories. We need to know about our own cognitive distortions. We need to help our trainees and staff be aware of theirs. And if it's really getting in the way and we can't find ways to deal with them on our own, we need to find support to talk about it. Ultimately, the ABCs is really the ABCDs, or dispute them. We have to learn to calmly dispute unhelpful, distorted stories. It's the end of a day. And I like to go back to that triangle of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can tell yourself a pretty jackal story. That seminar went poorly. I'll do just as poorly next week at the meeting. Nobody will come to my poster. My PI will be angry. He'll never send me to another meeting. She's going to not let me go to the next meeting I'm supposed to go to. I'm not cut out to be a scientist, right? And that can drive some really panicked, embarrassed, overwhelmed feelings. And that can drive like numbing out behaviors, avoiding your PI, skipping work. That's like a jackal story. We could also tell ourselves an ostrich story. No worries, it'll be fine. It could have gone better, but it's okay. Right? Then we feel confident or overconfident, and that drives unhelpful behaviors. So we really want to find ways to tell ourselves giraffe stories. Right? The seminar didn't go well. I'm disappointed. I need to practice more. If I do, I can improve. That's a real growth mindset language. The talk matters, so I'm going to let go of the disappointment and make a plan to practice more. And literally, at the beginning, I think it sounds as awkward as I wrote it, but the honest truth is that it's amazing how quickly we can learn to recognize these and do something about it. And when we struggle, it's when we seek resources and support. Lots of students talk about this with therapists, and they find huge change. And they say, I just can't believe how much more confident I feel. So we've come up with an acronym, HATS. Hear your negative self-talk or your overly positive, distorted talk. Appreciate you have a choice. Talk back like a realistic giraffe, and seek help and access resources. That's really the secret to resilience, is seeking help and accessing resources. A hack for me that really works is, are these thoughts hurting me or helping me? For whatever reason, when I get really caught up in my catastrophizing train, if I sit down, take a really mindful breath, I then say, is it helping or hurting? There's something really scientific for me about that. And then I say, oh, well, it's really hurting me. It works for actions too, but I do it a lot with thoughts. And I think it's a hack that a lot of students like. I want to come back and just close the loop, right? So the honest truth is, toxic workplace cultures, discrimination, bias, poor mentoring, absent mentoring, it triggers cycles of distorted thinking and imposter fears in us and in the trainees that are experiencing this. And somehow the community has to change. In some ways, when I give these lectures, I feel terrible because I feel like we're telling the students learn to thrive in a really difficult environment. But I think the message is, we need to learn to thrive and we need to change the environment. And I think that for me is one of the big messages that's been coming out of all my dialogues with students and faculty and staff over the pandemic. To build a wellness culture, we all have to embrace these concepts. We have to extend on what's happening on our campus already. We need to really learn some things about mental health, and we have to maintain openness to talking about mental health. We need as many trainings as possible at every national meeting on our campuses. We really need to make this a part of the culture of science. One thing people enjoy is making a wellness collage. It's a great reminder of who we are and what helps us stay well. I'll share mine with you. It's really a reminder of what brings us joy. And this is my wellness collage. That's my wife and son. Actually, right before the pandemic, he moved out, and we look forward to having a chance to see him very soon. If I didn't exercise, I would be the least emotionally intelligent person in the world. But I've noticed over time that sometimes I got to spend time around little kids to feel good about myself. So this year I did virtual Take Your Child to Work Day and did science improv with a whole bunch of kids over Zoom. They're better on Zoom than I am. Art and food and nature and pets and travel and friends. And you have your own wellness collage, and it's different than mine. Make it and use it as a reminder. I have been so stressed, and just seeing this picture reminds me that it's beautiful weather, and I'm going to get onto the tennis courts as soon as I can. We have a monthly mental health series. All of them are archived on our YouTube channel. I'm very excited that next Monday is the psychology of career decision making. I think it will be an excellent talk. And then we're going to talk about trauma, both individual and group trauma, COVID trauma, the trauma of discrimination and racism. I hope you'll join us then. And we're going to wrap up for the year by talking about being more welcoming to colleagues on the autism spectrum. So I want to thank you for the chance to be here. I was honored to be asked and glad that it worked out. I'll take a rain check on dinner. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was fabulous. Every time I hear you talk, I spend the whole hour reflecting on myself, and I just love that you allow me to do that. So I'm going to introduce our panel. I got to share my little screen here. Let me do this. All right. So next we will have questions from the audience and a panel discussion from our WIBMIB committee. And I just wanted to introduce everybody. So the moderator of the panel discussion will be Patty Kane, who's from SUNY Upstate. And she will be joined by 3 committee members: Marilee Benore from the University of Michigan, Dearborn, Karen Allen from Boston University, and Kelly Hagen from the National Institutes of Health. So please put your questions in the chat, or put your questions in the chat, and Patty or I will figure out how to get them to Sharon and to the panelists. All right, so now I can stop sharing and I can go stop my video.
Okay, I'll take over now, and just want to really thank you for the talk. That was wonderful in so many ways. I mean, just to start and say, all that we've been through this year could have a positive outcome. Maybe it's a time when things can change, is a really great way to look at things. And so if people want to, there's already a few comments and questions in the chat, but maybe we could get feedback from the panel members. So Marilee, you're first on my screen.
Sure. Well, first, thank you. It was a wonderful talk. I love the idea that my therapist is really a wellness mentor, and that my spirit animal is going to be a giraffe. And I learned so much in that talk. It was terrific. So I have lots of questions, but I'm sure that many of our audience does as well.
Karen? You're muted, Karen.
Yes. It happens a lot. People often wish they could meet me anyway. So thank you very much for a wonderful talk. When I think about these things, one thing that always strikes me about us scientists, just in our everyday lives, we're trained to be scientists, but many of the things that we have to teach others, we have no training in at all. And one of those things, is how to mentor others, how to be resilient, even how best to teach others. And these are all things we're supposed to pick up anecdotally. And we really, the opportunities afforded by, your institute, and that we can provide each other through things like our panel today is really important. And so I just wanted to sort of give that feedback first.
Thank you.
And Kelly?
Yeah, Sharon, that was wonderful as always. I just wanted to say a few other things. It's certainly what you're talking about is definitely prevalent in science, but I honestly think it's our whole society. I mean, how many times do we hear how nobody uses their vacation time, right? We get those statistics every year. Like, there is just something about our society where it is not valued to take care of yourself, and wellness is not valued. So I think those are really, really important points. And then I'm just wondering, could you speak to people about some of the resources that might be available to some of the people that are watching this, both PIs as well as students through your office?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And I totally agree. I like to focus on science, but the honest truth is this is a problem in law and medicine and education and everything, right? So our Becoming a Resilient Scientist series is now run 3 times a year. It will always be a webinar format so that trainees across the US can participate. That series is 2-hour webinar followed by an hour small group discussion a week later. And I'm trying to figure out a way to fund those small groups. sort of regularly for a broader audience. But we have a train the trainer model that we're running right now with 50 schools, and I'm pretty committed to finding funding for that. The mental health series was a one-time thing. It really came out of just my feeling that this was a very hard year and that we needed to be decreasing the stigma around mental health support. But I'm pretty committed to finding a way to keep that going. That is also open to everyone. It's an hour lecture and an hour small group, and the small groups are run by mental health providers. I mean, it's not therapy. Nobody, right, in an hour can dive into an issue, but it's really a resource rich 2 hours. I always learn a lot. And then I want to think about a way, you know, this year I started some webinars at NIH for faculty, and I've been both really optimistic about those and pessimistic simultaneously, because people come and they seem really enthusiastic and they actually reach out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we can change things. And then I think about the number of people and how few really come. And also, and I mean, one thing I'd like to say, I mean, this is women in biochemistry and molecular biology. It is the women who are coming and doing all of this heavy lifting. The number of men in these webinars is very low, or lower than it should be. I would like to find a way to offer some of those through, I don't know, through either going to a meeting and offering it for PIs. I would like to try to do more, but those two things are open already. And will stay open. The pandemic for us was a real eye-opener that we can do so much by webinar, and students all over the US are benefiting, and we benefit from meeting them. So it's a win-win.
Okay, we've got some things coming into the questions. And so one of the first ones is from Margaret Fuqua. And so she says, what are some strategies for helping young members in a lab in the importance of taking care of themselves? They're burning out. And really as a senior team member, but not a manager, what are some ways a peer can help? And it seems like this is really important for the idea of building a community of wellness.
Yeah, well, I'll be curious to see what the three of you say, because I don't have a lab anymore. And you watch this happen in your lab. But I know that a lot of times our trainees come to our wellness activities because somebody in their group, often it's a postdoc or a staff scientist, sometimes it's the PI, said, hey, you seem really stressed, and you know, you're new and you don't want to get isolated. And they have these group lunches and they have these wellness resources. So sometimes just saying, hey, come with me. But one of the things that they also can do is plan a journal club around wellness. Like there's the literature on, I mean, positive psychology has a science behind it. And I know basic scientists like to pick it apart, right? It's not as rigorous as doing densitometry of your bands on a gel. But there is science about all of this. And reading some of those papers could be a really powerful thing.
Any comments, Marilee? Were you saying something and you're muted?
I was just saying that's a great idea. We primarily have undergraduates, so to try, a journal club where they can just kind of listen and or maybe participate, it's a wonderful idea. I like that.
And I'll say one other thing about that. The earlier people hear this material, the easier it is for them to make good decisions as they move forward. We really want our undergraduates to hear this so that they go into labs of mentors who are mensches, right? Why do people land in tour mentor labs, right? Like we don't want that. And so the earlier people hear this, the better.
Okay, we have another question. Are imposter fears more common in women?
The work was started by Dr. Pauline Rose-Clance to look at women in academic environments. She started with women, and her initial hypothesis was that they would be higher in women, and certainly her early research bore that out. And then she started thinking of people of color, anyone marginalized in a space. But in the end, what the research shows is that they can impact anyone. What we see with our trainees is that they are experienced by many, many men as well as women, but probably, I mean, I don't read all the literature. My guess is that there's still maybe more women struggling with imposter fears than men.
Okay, and then we have a couple comments, then a question. I'd love to get the panel's input on balancing traditionally valued aspects of careers, research and teaching, with mentoring activities that often take up lots of time and emotional currency, but are often equally personally rewarding. And so kind of how I think the balancing act is one of the things that women universally deal with. And so are there comments on that? I guess I could say it isn't necessarily a conflict, but it can be difficult. I think if you can build an environment where people help each other, maybe not everything depends on you. That would be one thing I would think.
Yeah, and even I would think like even reaching out within your department to your department chair and or mentors, and seeing that kind of mentoring can be built into the structures that are valued by merit review. So in other words, talk about it as part of your community service is mentoring and doing mentoring activities. And really, by running a lab, you're taking on that mentoring responsibility in so many ways. And so I think it should be part and parcel, that third leg of the triangle, right? Of basically it's community service, but it's community service within your own lab and your own department.
I think this also gets back to the whole point of, we have to value wellness, our wellness, the wellness of the people in our labs, the wellness of the community more than we currently do. Because again, the mentoring and everything I think is disproportionately, those types of responsibilities have disproportionately fallen on women and have not been valued to the extent that they should be valued within our society. And that needs to change too.
Yeah, I think that's something that is a very practical thing that could change. For example, if you make that something that's part of evaluation, part of tenure, things like that. Okay, if there aren't more comments on that, I'll move on. You touched on a very common struggle with perfectionism. So often perfectionism is unconsciously reinforced by our teachers, mentors, and peers, and can serve us well as we climb the career ladder. How do you suggest we foster the growth mindset environment more so than reinforcing an environment where perfectionism really equals success?
Yeah, so first I should plug on the YouTube channel in the mental health section, which is the top, is the talk on anxiety, and the speaker addresses perfectionism for about 20 minutes of the talk. So at the beginning is a talk about the biology of anxiety, and then it switches to sort of tools and tricks, and she talks a lot about perfectionism. So I think that we all need to be on the lookout for toxic perfectionism. I mean, when we have to call it out, right? We have to tell somebody that we've gone back and forth now 5 drafts, and this is a proposal, and it's not going anywhere. It's just an exercise, and so we're going to move on, and we're going to do some science. That this is not a document that needs to be, and I try to not use the word perfect. It's really hard to remove it from, I mean, it's so ingrained in our language, but this doesn't have to be the best possible document. It just has to be a very good document. And then we maybe want to make a distinction. Well, this is going to a funding agency, so this we want to actually take a little farther. And I think we have to be pretty intentional about defining where things fall on that continuum. I work for government, so I get to say good enough for government work all the time, right? And I know that's not really meant in a positive way, but it's actually a great message. This is good enough for graduate school, or this is good enough for, they give a talk, they make a poster for, right now is Post-Bac Poster Day at NIH. It's lovely, it's wonderful, but it's just NIH. And like, you should not be having so much stress around this experience. And we should say it's good enough for your post-bac, right? When you go to your first Gordon conference, you might want it to be a little bit different. So I like being intentional up front. I don't know if it really helps anyone, but
That's a good idea, because I think perfectionism, part of that is everything is equal, right? That it all has to be equally perfect.
Yeah.
So we have a question from an undergraduate. Thank you very much. I'm an undergraduate student hoping to pursue research. What can I do to support and encourage my peers and myself as we start in this field, since it's a difficult time to stay optimistic? Really good question.
yeah. And that's the people we need coming into science. So it's really nice to get that question. I think that the more students develop their emotional intelligence, their communication skills, the more they learn about conflict and difficult conversations, the more they realize that there's science, and then there's all of the science of people. And the more they weigh those equally and start getting training, I think they'll change science. Any student who wants to can participate in our resilience program this summer virtually. They just need to go. Our website is training.nih.gov, and college students from all over the US are welcome. And we'll be starting in June. And so bring friends, find other talks like this at national meetings, ones around conflict, ones around diversity. All of us need like not one webinar on unconscious bias. We need like a year training. We have so much to unlearn around welcoming environments. Find those kinds of things, do them as undergraduates. Get involved in health disparities research and community engagement early.
That's great. We have another question. I definitely need to work on my window of tolerance and take care of my mental health.
Here's Teo.
Do you have any strategies with dealing with the need to constantly do better regardless of what you've already accomplished?
I'm sorry, the dog has been barking.
Oh, sorry.
One of you has to help, or I need to hear it again.
That's okay. So to open the window of tolerance, are there any strategies for dealing with the need to constantly do better regardless of what you've already accomplished?
Yeah, that whole concept of healthy striving, I mentioned self-compassion for a minute. A lot of times students just say, talk to the hand when we talk about self-compassion. But the honest truth is that the way we stop pushing ourselves all the time is we actually stop and accept ourselves where we're at. Like, do we really need, in the middle of a pandemic, and in the midst of all of the upset and turmoil around us, like, does it really matter if we skip a weekend? Or if we just shut our lab and, send an email out I like to call them snow days. In our office, we have snow days in the middle of July. Like, if we just can accept if we can learn to say, this is enough. I'm enough. I'm carrying a lot right now, and I'm enough. Then we aren't constantly pushing ourselves. It's not like I know how to do it. In a lot of ways, I feel totally foolish giving these talks because I struggle with all of these things. But then therapists tell me they struggle with all of these things. So I feel better. I realize all of us struggle with these things. But I've noticed when I just say I'm enough, right? I did my best. I did enough, or I didn't do my best, but I did as much as I can, that I don't push myself. And then I take off for the weekend, or I leave early, or I take a walk with a colleague instead of doing one more piece of dumb paperwork in my office. And then I realize when I get back, I'm better. I just think somehow we have to, like, we all need like a tattoo. I'm enough. That's part of that inner jackal, I think, an inner giraffe, right? I wish I had an answer for that.
I think that's something everybody struggles with. The next question is, are there any studies looking at how different generations of PIs mentor, and are some more prone to be giraffes versus jackals? There was earlier a comment from Jeff
Good question.
Kapler about lab heads avoiding conflict. So, and how if you avoid conflict, you can start to translate that to supporting trainees that are successful and not helping ones that are struggling. So all of those things kind of go together.
I'm curious to hear from the panelists. What I'm going to say is most of us are shaped by the cultures we've been in. And so this hope that every new PI is going to be a part of the culture change we need, I think might turn out to be disappointing, because some people have worked in really difficult environments and they've internalized it as a successful approach. That said, I do find new PIs, at least at NIH and the PIs that I'm interacting with through the resilience program, much more open to coming to webinars and working on this material. And they send emails and say, you know, I have this trainee that I'm wondering if I'm mentoring them the right way. So I do see some change, but I'm not sure. I mean, I know lots of really senior people who are incredible mentors and some junior people that don't seem to put a lot of energy into it, but I'm not aware of any generation. I mean, they're probably there. I have to admit, especially lately, I'm more interested in talking to students than reading. So I'm a little bit behind. But anecdotally, I'm wondering, Karen or Kelly or Marilee, do you have a sense of change in culture?
I think there's more awareness that we should not be recreating ourselves, that that's really not our end goal in training and mentoring students, that it's much more interdisciplinary now than it ever used to be. So my expectation is that students will be able to work together with peers from other disciplines and learn that that language of psychology is just as good as science data. So,
Yeah.
I feel that there is more acceptance about speaking out when things are not going well between the mentor and the mentee. And so I think that itself will enable better change. That's really important. I still think, people are individuals. So I still see young people who are acting in what I think of as old-fashioned ways, falling into those bad patterns. And I see people who are quite mature in their careers and embracing the new ways of engendering, health and resilience in their students. And so there will be a mix, but the more we're willing to talk about it for mentees and mentors to have that dialogue and to have dialogue with others to bring it forward. If it's not happening, then it will all take shape in the future. Yeah.
Okay, this fits really well. Much of what you're addressing are the product of institutional policies and practices. How do you suggest addressing those? In other words, how do we cure the disease as opposed to addressing the symptoms?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do really, sometimes I feel terrible as somebody at the NIH going and talking to PIs, oh, you should find time for wellness conversations. And then I think, oh yeah, and we're the people with the pay line at, 22% or 18 or whatever, low percent. I think that the reward structures do need to change. I think that, at NIH a lot, they say, oh, well, if somebody's a really bad mentor, we take away their right to have trainees. And I'm like, I've been here since 2007, like, show me, right? I mean, I have I call them repeat offenders, right? Every year, a couple of trainees come through and it's just an unhealthy environment. I think we haven't found ways to stop that from happening. I think that there could be a way to change everything, and that is to give the money to the trainees and not the PIs. And that could be done at NIH Intramural. That could be done extramurally where a trainee gets the money, right? And if it's not working, they get one change. So you can't just serially say, I'm going to change labs, I'm going to change labs, right? I mean, eventually you have to sit and say, what's my role in making this work? But I think the culture would change a lot if we all knew that if we're not decent citizens and we're not working to make it work, that people could vote with their feet and go somewhere else. And it doesn't seem like rocket science to me to do that experiment, but it hasn't been done yet. And I really want to see it done. And I feel like the intramural program is a place to do that because it's simpler moving money around. And I've brought it up occasionally and hasn't really, there's so many issues that we're tackling and then the pandemic is hit. But I do think that'd be a really interesting thing. We'd change culture a lot if you couldn't keep your people. And I want to acknowledge that sometimes it's the trainee, you know, I mean, it's not, sometimes it's fit, sometimes it's a trainee that's not behaving right. It's a really complex dynamic. And so it needs to be the other way as well, that a PI needs to say, this person is disturbing the equanimity of my group. And I've tried, and here's what I've tried, right? And it's not working. And I think if we got rid of the apprentice model, it's really not working. It's like an ancient model, right? It's like from so long ago, like it doesn't make sense. One person can't have 20 apprentices simultaneously. The whole model is tied to an old time. I don't know. I feel like that might make a big difference. I'd love to see that experiment done.
Maybe if you built into changing that model more emphasis on the type of environment that you're creating to educate and train people, maybe that could have an impact in terms of prioritizing some of the things that we're talking about and beginning to change the culture.
That's right. Or if a little bit of funding was based on the environment. You have a track record of supporting diversity of careers. You have a track record of supporting diversity of people in science. You have a track record of dealing with the difficulties with compassion. Oh, you get a little bump in your budget, right? There's an incentive. I don't know. Well, we really have to make some change.
I guess another thing is something that Karen said before, that people aren't necessarily trained for running a lab. And I don't know that we have good mechanisms for helping people who just are not getting off to a good start there. And maybe that's another thing to sort of train the trainers better.
So the National Research Mentoring Network runs some nice workshops. I don't know a lot about them because I tend to have at NIH this belief that the more I can do in-house, like if somebody hears one of my staff lecture when they have a problem, they can just, oh, I remember Lori, I'll email Lori. So I haven't been to a lot of the Norman trainings, but I've heard very, very good things about it. And I know a lot of universities are trying to tie getting slots in training grants to a willingness to get training. And, a lot of PIs who are resistant to the training say, at the end of the day, it wasn't terrible. And actually some of it was helpful. And some of those scenarios happened to me and I already worked out on it. But I think we need a sort of living learning lab where weekly, people can bring problems and strategize. And I don't know quite how to, there's an infrastructure needed for faculty development that I think a lot of universities don't have. Certainly NIH doesn't have it, right? And I think that reflects our belief that it's not important. And now here we are saying, oh, we have to learn all these things and unlearn all these things. So somehow we need a better infrastructure for faculty development in medical schools and research universities, the provost office and such.
Okay, we're getting quite near the end of our time. Are there any last comments from the panel? Okay.
I have a last comment. Actually, something that we've come up with has sparked an idea. I really liked your idea about a journal club about having to do with wellness. And, you know, our department, in trying to improve literacy about diversity, equity, and inclusion, have done things like we bought everybody the same book and then we discussed it. So that had to do with diversity, equity, inclusion. But if we read a book or an article about wellness, or a series of them, it's kind of nice because we're scientists, so we do well with data. So if we have something to actually talk about, not just our own experiences, but some third thing, it takes it takes some of the personal point away from it. You can talk about something in the third person, and maybe then be able to open up discussion better. I really like this idea.
That's good. And we have another comment, which is very timely, from Dixie Goss in the chat, which is one change might be to change science meetings. They start at 8 a.m. They go late in the evening. We're all hangry right now. Like Gordon conferences in Cold Spring Harbor especially. And so this is just building the message that everybody does science 24/7. So maybe that's something to think about. And the other thing I would do is just thank Sharon again. This has just been a wonderful session. And to remind people that in the chat, there is the link to register for our networking event next week. And everybody is welcome to that. It would be very nice to be able to continue this discussion.
Great. Thank you all. Stay safe and be well. And hopefully we'll see each other in person sometime soon. Take care.
Very soon. Thank you.
Bye.